The first thing people noticed about him was how carefully he held his daughter's hand, as if the world might suddenly tilt and he was the only thing keeping her steady. They stood near the entrance of the grand auditorium, surrounded by polished marble floors, crystal lights, and people dressed in confidence and wealth. He didn't belong there, and everyone could see it. His jacket was worn at the elbows, his shoes scuffed from years of hard work, and his eyes carried the quiet exhaustion of a man who had learned to survive without complaint. Still, he stood tall, because his little girl was looking up at him, and in her eyes, he was everything. The event was meant to honor heroes, leaders, and those who had served the nation with distinction. Uniforms gleamed, medals reflected light, and conversations flowed easily among people who had power and connections. The single father had none of that. He was there for one reason only. His daughter had begged him to come. She had received a handwritten invitation from someone important, though she didn't fully understand why. All she knew was that it mattered, and that her father had promised to never let her down again. Security noticed them almost immediately. In a place where every guest seemed to belong, the man and his daughter stood out like a crack in polished glass. A pair of guards exchanged looks, their expressions hardening into suspicion. They approached slowly, professionally, but without warmth. The father felt it before they spoke, that familiar tightening in his chest, the feeling he'd known too well since life had taken everything else from him. He gently pulled his daughter closer. Preparing himself for humiliation, he had learned to endure silently. His life had not always been this way. Once, he had dreams that stretched far beyond survival. He had served his country in ways few people ever knew about, and fewer still would ever believe. But war doesn't only end on the battlefield. It follows you home, creeps into your sleep, and settles into the spaces where hope once lived. When his wife passed away unexpectedly, the last piece of light he had leaned on disappeared. Grief hollowed him out, leaving behind a man who worked long hours, said little, and lived only for the small hand that reached for his in the dark. Raising his daughter alone had been the hardest mission of his life. There were nights he skipped meals so she could eat. Mornings he smiled through pain so she wouldn't worry. And years where his pride dissolved just to keep a roof over their heads. He never spoke about the past, never mentioned the uniform folded away in a box, never told her about the sacrifices that had shaped him. To her, he was simply Dad, the man who braided her hair clumsily, packed her lunches, and sat through school events looking like he didn't quite fit in but refusing to leave early. As security questioned him, their tone sharp and dismissive, he answered calmly. He explained that he had been invited, that his daughter's name should be on the list. They barely listened. To them, he was just another man who had wandered where he didn't belong. His daughter felt his hand tighten and looked up, confusion clouding her young face. She had never seen adults speak to her father this way, and something in her chest began to ache. The guards insisted they step aside. People nearby pretended not to notice, though some glanced over with curiosity, others with judgment. The father felt the old shame rise again, the same feeling he'd felt standing in job lines, eviction offices, and hospital corridors. He lowered his gaze, not because he was guilty, but because he was tired. Tired of explaining himself, tired of proving his worth to a world that had forgotten what he had given. That was when the room shifted. At the far end of the hall, a young woman froze mid. She had been walking beside a tall, authoritative man whose presence commanded respect without effort. The general, her father. She had attended countless events like this, but something about the scene near the entrance caught her eye. It wasn't the guards. It wasn't the crowd. It was the man's posture. The way he stood, even while being questioned, reminded her of something deeply familiar. Her breath caught as recognition, hit her like a wave. She excused herself before her father could stop her and began walking quickly toward the entrance. With every step, memories surfaced. Stories she had grown up hearing, a name spoken with reverence in her home, a man her father had once called brother. She stopped just a few feet away, staring at the single dad whose eyes widened slightly when he saw her. The guards turned, annoyed at the interruption, but their expressions changed instantly when they recognized who she was. The general's daughter? She looked at them, then at the man, and finally down at the little girl, clutching his hand. Her voice when she spoke was steady but filled with emotion. She asked the guards if they knew who they were speaking to. They didn't. She took a breath and said his name, not loudly, but clearly. The sound of it seemed to echo through the space between them. The father's shoulders tensed, years of silence threatening to break. The guards stiffened, unsure what they were missing. The daughter continued, explaining that this man had once saved her father's life, that he had led men through impossible odds, that his actions had shaped outcomes no one in that room could imagine. The general had approached by then, his expression unreadable until his eyes fell on the man. Then everything changed. His face softened, his posture shifted, and for a moment, the powerful leader looked like something else entirely. He looked humbled. He stepped forward, calling the man by a title he hadn't heard in years, one that belonged to a life he thought the world had buried. The room grew quiet. The general spoke about loyalty, sacrifice, and courage. He spoke about nights when hope was thin and this man had stood firm. He spoke about a debt that could never be repaid. Every word peeled back another layer of misunderstanding, revealing a truth no one had expected. The guards stepped back immediately. their earlier confidence replaced by shock and embarrassment. The single father listened, heart-pounding, unsure how to react. He hadn't come for recognition. He hadn't wanted attention. He had only wanted to keep his promise to his daughter. When the general thanked him publicly, when people around them began to whisper and stare with newfound respect, the man felt something crack inside him, not pride, but release. As if the weight of being unseen for so long had finally shifted, his daughter looked up at him with wide eyes, seeing him differently for the first time, not as a man struggling to get by, but as someone important, someone strong in a way she couldn't yet fully understand. He knelt down, meeting her gaze, and smiled softly. He told her that titles didn't matter, that what mattered was how you showed up for the people you loved. She hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapping around a hero she had known all along. They were escorted inside with honor. Seats were offered, apologies were whispered. But the most powerful moment wasn't the recognition or the respect. It was the way the father sat beside his daughter, shoulders a little less heavy, eyes a little brighter. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel seen. Not just for who he had been, but for who he still was. As the ceremony continued, the general spoke to the audience about service beyond medals, about sacrifices made quietly, about people who return home and fight battles. No one applauds. His words carried weight, but his gaze often returned to the single father in the crowd, a silent acknowledgement of shared history and unbroken bond. That night marked a turning point. Not because life suddenly became easy, but because something inside the man shifted. He realized that his past did not define him, but it did matter, that his struggles did not erase his worth, that being a good father, a present father, was its own kind of heroism. In the days that followed, opportunities opened, support arrived in unexpected forms. But more importantly, the man began to stand a little taller, speak a little freer, and believe again. His daughter carried the story with pride, not because of uniforms or titles, but because she saw what resilience looked like in human form. The world is full of people like him, people who have given everything and then quietly stepped into the shadows. People judged by appearances, overlooked by systems, and underestimated by strangers. But every so often, truth finds its way to the surface. And when it does, it reminds us that dignity cannot be stripped away by hardship, and worth is not measured by wealth or status. If this story moved you, let it be a reminder to look closer, to listen deeper, and to honor the unseen battles people carry every day. Heroes don't always wear uniforms, and strength often looks like patience, sacrifice, and love.